How did Black Flag get its start, and when did you realize that like you guys were really on to something?
Well, Black Flag had a very interesting history in that they were around before I was in them. They had...
You were hired, no?
Yes. They had 3 singers who all left, and I knew the band in that I was living in D.C. They would come through Washington on tour. They played the 930 Club. You're probably familiar with that place.
We played there.
Okay. And they would play there, and different members of the punk rock scene would put them up because no one could afford a hotel. And so myself, my friend Ian Mackay, we would put up visiting bands. So if you want to go meet Black Flag, just go to Ian's because they're sitting right there. And so we met them, became friends with them. And in 1981, they were doing an East Coast tour, and they were not playing Washington, but only playing in New York. So I said, well, I'll go up, go see the band, and drive back down. And so they did a show at Irving Plaza, and it was amazing. And they said, hey, come with us. We're going to play a bar down the street in an hour. And I said, okay. So I drove along with them like 4 blocks away, helped them load in the gear. And I'm looking at my watch going, I have to be at work in like 7 hours. And I have a long drive back to Washington. And I said, hey, fellas, you know that song you do, Clocked In, which is about going to work and what a drag it is? I said, can you play that for me? Because I got to go to work. And the singer at that time, Dez, said, this is for Henry because he's got to go to work. And then Dez kind of looked at me and like, reached the mic out like, you want to sing it? I'm like, well, I don't mind if I do.
Is this on tape?
I doubt it. And so I jumped on stage and I sang it with the way I thought it should be,
right.
You know, just kind of like head exploding. And I'll never forget looking around while we're doing the song at the rest of the band, and they're all kind of looking at me like, wow. And I remember looking at the audience, and I was like, that's something. And so the song was over very quickly, and I gave the microphone back to Dez, and I said, okay, well, I have to go. Thanks. And I jumped in my car and went back down to Washington, kind of staying awake, thinking, wow, I was in Black Flag for 90 seconds. It sure felt good. And now back to work. And so later that day, one of the band members called me. They said, hey, you know, there's a vocalist slot that has opened up. You kind of auditioned the other night. You want to come up here and really give it a go? And I'm looking at my minimum wage job, which it was a very good job, but I kind of grimly thought, well, that's going to be my life. Just these jobs that make the feet swell at the end of the day. I just reconcile myself to a life of that. Or I can go to New York on an Amtrak train and audition for my favorite band. Well, let's see. What do I have to really lose? And so it was a very odd kind of winning the lottery kind of story where I went from just some guy working at an ice cream store, managing it, to being, you know, and like 6 weeks later or so, I'm in front of like hundreds of some of the angriest young people I've ever encountered in my life, my first time on stage as the singer, with the entire front row, a bunch of, you know, surf crazies looking up at me, telling me I better be good or they're going to beat me up. So I passed muster, and they didn't beat me up. They surely would have. And to this day, it's one of the, I think one of those kind of rock and roll stories that sounds almost as cool as anybody else's. It's pretty bitchin'.
When I was a child, you know, skating in a neighborhood called Salem Village, the guys that really, really, really shredded would be listening to straight Black Flag.
It's a good soundtrack.
I mean, and I've seen a lot of dudes get, you know, their faces bashed in when your songs come on.
Well, I was about to say, those songs can make you feel ridiculously brave and somewhat impervious.
So, right. So don't you think that like that is like your own version of Miles Davis? You know, that comprehensive, really serious, you know, Bitches Brew jazz.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like it's.
I hear you.
Just using a different medium,
Sure.
no?
As far as what I take away from myself in all of that is, I gave it as much as I could, as many calories and ounces of sweat and blood as I could give to it. I really went very fearlessly, like this could be the last show. Let's just go, you know, never take our foot off the gas pedal. But my peers, my bandmates were like that too. And so to my credit, I will say that I gave as hard as I possibly could. How it sounds, what it means in retrospect, I don't know. But at the time,
It matches.
okay. Well, thank you. But at the time, I took what I had and hurled it as hard as I could to what I thought was into the strike zone.
Wow.
We kind of wanted to be the anti-bad, and so we would be for the good, where we would drive by people and roll down the window and go, "Hey, hey, looking good," and just keep driving. And you'd see the confusion. So I'm like, "Here we go. Oh. Thanks."
You've been quoted as saying that punk rockers are narrow-minded. What do you mean by that?
Well, they sometimes can be. And back in my day, in the 1850s when I was young, one summer Black Flag didn't cut we didn't cut our hair because we would get so much outrage from punk rock. "What are you, hippie?" Like, yeah, I'm a hippie now because I haven't cut my hair for a week and a half. Like, what, all of a sudden this is an elitist group? And I rebelled against that so much, where we would play a song that was like 4 whole minutes long. Like, what's up with that? Like, what do you mean what's up with that? We're trying something. And I found these people to be, certainly not all of them, but by and large, I found them to be some of the most elitist, closed-minded people I had ever encountered. I'm back in high school with all these guys who were making fun of me. And I thought music is like the judgment-free zone. Right. In that if I don't like your band, I'm not showing up to the gig, but I'm not going to stand around and put you down. Right. And, life's too short. And so I found punk rockers to be very restrictive. You'd go to some cities in some parts of America, and there'd be someone who didn't look like all the others for whatever reason. And I'd watch from the stage as that person would get singled out and get pummeled, and we'd stop the show, because we can't have that. Flag is down on the play, and I'm like, all right, you got to stop that. And all those guys now turn on you. You're like, great, and you barely get through the show, and you'll see them again. They're all waiting for you outside.
So basically what you're saying is that what began as an escapism for you from where you were from and from your teenage years, a world where you could easily become bullied, you went into a world that was far more violent and far less tolerant than where you came from. So you went from the frying pan straight into the fire.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, certainly in all these places, there's great people. And by and large, they were really good. But there was this element, very close-minded and very authoritarian. And I went the other way. I'd like to thank them, because ultimately it got me into listening to Sun Ra and Albert Ayler. I rebelled in my own way. Right. I found all kinds of other parts of the record store to go shopping in. And then, years later, I had my own band, the Rollins band. And we went very urgently in whatever we wanted to do, we did it. And it seemed to be in the zeitgeist. People seemed to like everything we did. We did very, very well. But again, that could have been the times changing. Right. Because from the mid-'80s into the '90s, I saw a lot of that restrictive kind of ideas with music start to break down. In the '90s, bands that obviously you're very well aware of, bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, like that big Seattle scene, and the bands that kind of slayed the hair bands, and all of a sudden everyone was scrambling to redefine FM music and the record industry and MTV. Yeah. A lot of those bands really helped break down barriers, because you're not going to tell Kurt Cobain he can't jam out. You can't tell Soundgarden they can't put a big solo in the middle of their song. That's right. They're selling too many records. They're too damn good. They really were really great. Yeah. And so music changed. And so I think there's a lot of, the generations that came before you, you're in this dense forest of culture. Bands before you, they hack through it a bit to allow a path. You turn the path into a single lane road. Then the next people pick up the baton, they turn into a 2-lane. And now it's like 8 lanes, there's rest stops. And it's because everyone else kind of took it on the beak for the next generation to go out and do their thing.
Wow. All of you, maybe most of you, if not all of you, have someone who's younger than you who looks up to you in some way. They listen to what you say. And that being the case, why would you get any young person around you and dampen their great and high-flying spirits? Wouldn't you do anything you could to put some kind of inspirational gasoline on that inspirational fire that comes from them? That's one of the reasons I have a radio show. Kids write me, like, dude, I just bought my first Sun Ra record because of you. Mission accomplished.
When your body shape changes, that sense of accomplishment is probably one of the most propellant forces in my life today. It's the applying yourself. It's the discipline. It's a great journey. You got a big mouth. Why don't you get up there next week? I went, I don't know, man. And I said, why? He said, because we're offering $10. I went, I'll take that action. Of all the things I've ever done in my life, it was the one thing that felt the most natural. Just being on stage with no one else on stage, it's just me and a microphone relating to you, the audience.